Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I am back with more of my talk with Mary McDonough. So here we go, more with Mary. So even many of the episodes that really featured your character, many of them were also sort of relationship oriented. I just the other day watched The Portrait because it's one I've been asked about recently, and it was a very unusual episode, and I noticed that the music throughout stayed very dark and moody, even in scenes where that wasn't what it was about. So
I feel like what's great about the show is that we got into some very really important topics, and I feel that our characters were written around the topics and the people that those were about. And so it wasn't really about Erin. She just happened to be the vessel that brought the story to light. And so that was, PTSD, right? And so really important, something that probably was not really addressed very much in the 70s. And I, so I didn't have that much to do with it. I do remember that Jared was kind of older than me. And I know that he did not want to kiss me. And because I think he was like, "You're really young." And I said, "What?" So we were in between the sound stages, and I just walked up to him and I said, "Okay, let's get this over with." And I just reached up and gave him a kiss off the set. Uh-huh. And so just to make it less awkward. But, your character, you had your, being a nurse and the pill thing, but Erin wasn't always really well developed. She was always trying things and kind of failing at them and put into different careers and things like that. So I feel like that she was just sort of facilitating, different storylines at times, and there wasn't really a through line. And that she became a principal and a teacher is interesting, because she could have had this, working at the defense plant and become a businesswoman. But, so much of the storylines were about what she looked like and the beauty contest that she was in and the pinup girl and the photography contest and, all of that kind of stuff. And, that was hard for me because I felt it didn't give her, well, it is a struggle, and it was a struggle for me in real life. It added to that, the issues in my personal life about like, where is my value? And if that was Erin's value, then what was mine?
Yeah, and it was interesting how, I was very aware, because I was 13 when we started, of going through those incredibly awkward years on camera and with storylines that were all about those awkward things. And I feel a little less like yours focused on the awkward things as storylines as much as perhaps you felt them personally doing, which I certainly did at times. It's like, oh, this is like really an awkward scene to do, or an awkward situation. But I think it's interesting that you say that, and because that is so much of an issue for young women to go through, of if you're not pretty, then you're worried about it. Yeah. You need to be pretty, you want to be pretty, you want to be popular, can be such an issue for young girls. And I felt like I was on that side, but it's like, oh, Mary's the pretty one, and I'm always the tomboy, and I just want to be the pretty one, and I was never the pretty one.
Judy's the smart one. Mary Ellen's the smart one.
I was the tomboy.
She's a nurse and then a doctor. Originally, you were the tomboy, but yeah. So for me, and it's funny because somebody wrote to me recently, because I had talked about that, about being labeled the pretty one, but it was always said to me like it was something bad, that it was going to hurt you and Cammie, and it would hurt other people's feelings because people would whisper it, like, you're the pretty one. So that must be bad because that will hurt people. So being pretty is bad. And so I recently had a fan write to me something that said, "You're so obnoxious that you said that. Like, why would you even call yourself pretty? That's so arrogant of you." And I think that Mary Ellen and Elizabeth are way prettier than you. I think, well, maybe you missed the kind of the point of that whole story. It wasn't me saying that, right?
No, and it was really Earl Hamner right from the beginning who talked about about Erin as a character and about you as the actress, and how just really stunning you were as a child, and how you
Thank
really
you.
grew into that during the course of the series. So I never heard you at any point talking about yourself in that manner, like, oh, I'm the pretty one. To
Okay, I
me, it was
certainly did
always
not
just
feel that.
about the characters, and I never felt like my character was focused on the looks. And being
Oh,
someone in my
an
teens and
image.
early 20s, I just kind of thought, we're so isolated that I wasn't necessarily aware of the impact, and I got so much fan mail from relative to the way Mary Ellen was, that I wasn't really paying attention. Whereas for your character, it wasn't you who, just for the record, it was not you who originated that, and we all know that was Earl. And
Thank you,
it was the
Judy.
producers, and it was the storylines.
Yes,
So
exactly. It was not, well, but, and then for me, it was like, that's what you're supposed to live up to, right? That's your value, right? And I didn't feel pretty, and I didn't feel thin, for sure, because I was always dieting and trying to fit into all those costumes that now you're doing the beauty contest next week, I hope you've lost weight. And they're so on me about my weight and what I looked like, that I did not feel like pretty, and pretty was not fun. It was not something to aspire to.
pressure.
And so much pressure.
I have to say, I was also just watched the pinup the other day, and that shot of you on the piano, and with the short shorts and the long legs, I was like, how stunning is that? You just
thank you.
You looked fabulous, and your legs looked fabulous, and I was like, oh my God. And what was up with us wearing short shorts? You did in that, and I did in the Dust Bowl Cousins. I'm like, who decided short shorts were okay? I get comments about those all the time.
Well, and our hair not being, because when the Charlie's Angels was popular, we had like little
haircuts,
hair instead of 1940s hairdos, so that's why when we did the special, I just went like, yep, put my hair in a bubble do. Yep, 1960s, do it. And I had this huge, bubble do. But yeah, I know. And it's funny, like, we didn't make a lot of those decisions, and it sort of came down to us, like, here's what you're doing. And they would come to me and tell me weeks before, so I would diet. And, in a couple of weeks, we have this episode, and you're wearing, I don't know, short shorts, and a crop top. So then I would sort of starve myself. But those were my lessons to learn. And I always thought that I was so alone. And the good thing in writing my book and talking about it so much and doing workshops and with people around it and public speaking is that there are so many people who feel exactly the same way. There's so much more of an awareness around that now. And, and body shaming is such a thing. But, back to the, but still important topics, I think the show covered, especially later on when John Boy had a friend who was wounded in the war and came and was in a wheelchair, right? Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
And Erin went on a date with him. I got so many letters from people, from veterans, saying, I wish that Erin lived in my town because no one will go out with me here. And so I think the show was so powerful in the messages and dealing with issues that were not being dealt with, and that are still so topical today. I think that that's why, people still love the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course you had one of the other really devastating episodes, the first casualty with poor GW. And, so many people were crushed by that, because there was like Kurt, there was a character that people had really come to know and love, and people were like, why did they kill him off? Did he not want to come back? And, I know with Tom, because I talked with Tom, and Tom was very open with the viewers about how he asked for a little raise, and they sent him to Pearl Harbor, and then they killed him off. Yes, that's what he said. He said, and then with the episode where Kurt came back, he said, that they approached him, and he asked for that same minimal little raise, and then they hired Scott Hylands instead. But I don't think that was the case with David. My take on it was that they wanted us, they wanted the war to really touch home, and they weren't going to kill off one of the brothers, and they had not decided yet to kill off Kurt. So you know, it really impacted the family, and I think made the war very real to
I think you're
family.
right. And I think a lot of what happened too is, Rod wrote a lot, was a producer, and he wrote a lot about the war. He had been in the war. He served. So there was this awareness about going into war and what it does and how it affects families. And so I think that they wanted it to be very, very real, which I think was good. And it just, and no, David would have come back, David never, he's so great. And
David.
We're so lucky that we still get to see him now and have a relationship
we both got to
with him.
date him.
I know. He's just the nicest guy ever.
He is so sweet.
So sweet.
Thanks for joining me and Mary with our little chat about the Waltons. I will be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and another segment with Mary McDonough in the future. Thanks for watching.